Climate change will displace up to 143 million people by 2050, according to a study by the World Bank. As families flee water scarcity, crop failure, and rising sea levels, the refugee crisis is bound to wreak havoc on the international system with tremendous economic and political consequences. Russia, however, is likely to be insulated from the most disastrous effects. In fact, the Russians actually stand to benefit from climate change in numerous ways, and policymakers in Moscow believe this is their license to global resurgence. I'm your host Shirvan and welcome to Caspian Report. If you're like me, free Wi-Fi can be a tempting source, but such public networks are not secure. With only a little effort, your connected laptop or phone can be breached. That's where NordVPN comes in. At an affordable rate, it hides your IP and secures all your devices. So if you're ready to take your privacy and security more seriously, head on over to nordvpn.com/CaspianReport or use the link in the description. You'll get a 75% discount on the 3-year plan, and if you use the promo code CaspianReport, you'll get an additional month for free. Now back to Russia's climate change ambitions. For years, Russian government ministries and public science services have suggested that Moscow is exploring for ways to profit from climate change rather than look for ways to slash carbon emissions. At an Arctic forum in March 2017, President Putin confirmed as much when he said that climate change and the receding ice in the Arctic carried economic benefits for Russia. His statement came shortly after viewing a video that showed an icebreaker docking at one of Russia's Arctic ports to test a new shipping route across the North Pole. To grasp the context of the situation, we need to take a step back. Foremost, rising sea levels affect urban coastal centers the most. Low-lying nations in Southeast Asia, Europe, and North America will be hit particularly hard. Still worse, countries that lack resources, such as Bangladesh, Nigeria, Myanmar, Cambodia, etc., will be without defense and instigate waves of refugees. In Russia, however, most people reside in the European half of the Russian landmass, which is nowhere near an ocean. So geography shields many of Russia's major urban centers, giving the government additional options. For comparison, a modest sea level increase of 45 centimeters would displace 14.2 million Americans, but under the same conditions, it would only affect 1.8 million Russians. Washington would still maintain better resources to respond to climate change compared to Moscow, but while in the past, the inland focus of Russia was perceived as a weakness, now it is an advantage. Nowhere is Moscow's potential more evident than in the Arctic, where its leadership anticipates an economic boom ushered in by rising temperatures and melting ice. A study from the US National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration claims that the volume of the Arctic's oldest and thickest ice has decreased by an astonishing 95%. For the global community, that is dreadful news. For Russia, it is an opportunity. Another study by the US Geological Survey estimates that 13% of the world's untapped crude oil reserves and 30% of the natural gas reserves are trapped in the Arctic, right in Putin's backyard. As the permafrost disappears, while research and development improve, the costs of resource extraction are set to reduce and facilitate an economic boom for Russia. Putin therefore embraces climate change. Additionally, as the ice caps melt, the Arctic would open up the northern sea route. This shipping lane, which extends from Russia's coast by Murmansk to the Bering Strait to East Asia, would make for a shorter journey than the one through the Suez Canal. Russia will still have to invest in new ports, railways and roads, as well as set up permits and insurances. But as the ice continues to melt, the new waterway will become navigable for a longer duration of time. This would offer Chinese exports an alternative route to Europe, thereby granting Moscow substantial economic and political leverage over NATO member states, which is why last year Putin issued a demand to Russian agencies to quadruple the cargo volume being shipped through the Arctic. The deadline was set for 2024, and international shipping firms have already begun testing the waters. For example, in the summer of 2017, a commercial LNG tanker sailed from Europe to Asia across the Northern Sea route without the protection of an icebreaker. A decade ago, such voyages were unimaginable, but with global temperatures rising, it is becoming the new reality. As shipping companies cheer the melting ice, the warming climate could also morph a significant portion of the Siberian territories from an uninhabitable frozen tundra to a fertile land. The agricultural potential in Siberia is enormous, and if realized, it would contribute to the diversification of the Russian economy. With that in mind, since 2016, the financial elites in Moscow have placed their bets in Siberia, and a real estate investment spree has taken hold. Elsewhere, the Russian energy sector is following the lead. In December 2018, the Yamal LNG project, which is a $27 billion energy venture in the Arctic Circle, reached full capacity thanks to warming temperatures. Multi-billion-dollar projects such as these reinforce the notion that climate change grants the Kremlin an edge over its rivals. But there is more. As noted earlier, by mid-century, about 143 million people are expected to be displaced by climate change. This would not only fuel a new refugee crisis, but also continue to instigate political instability and polarization in Europe and North America. As Western political institutions turn inward, resources are taken away from countering the Kremlin's activities. These dynamics will intensify as waves of climate change refugees accelerate. In the past, Putin has demonstrated that he is able and willing to exploit domestic divisions to weaken Western institutions and further his own agenda. Just imagine the advantages the Kremlin could reap from the political and economic crisis fueled by an even larger refugee crisis. Without doubt, this will strengthen the hand of the Russian state. The final point of consideration is the impact of rising sea levels on the US military and thereby its worldwide power projection. In 2018, the US Department of Defense found that nearly half of America's military installations are in danger of significant damage from extreme weather. Later that year, in October, Hurricane Michael destroyed as many as 17 F-22 Raptors, which were stored in hangars at an airbase in Florida. The cost of damage was estimated at a staggering $338 million and affected nearly 10% of the American F-22 inventory. Incidents such as these offer a glimpse into the time to come. So in the decades ahead, Washington will have to reinforce or relocate more than 1,700 military installations. This will be an extraordinarily expensive endeavor that will force the American leadership to deprioritize the geopolitical containment of Russia. It is entirely possible that in face of such surging military costs, American policymakers would reduce their security commitments abroad. Either way, rising sea levels will weaken America's ability to project power across the globe while creating long-term opportunities for the Russians. So, Siberian agriculture, Arctic shipping, climate change refugees, and reduced US military commitments add to the Kremlin's belief in positive climate change. In turn, the confident attitude drives the country's lack of commitments in reducing greenhouse emissions. Now, this is not to say that the leadership in Russia hasn't done anything. At the domestic level, energy and ecological legislations have been passed, and the government has allocated about $22 billion on a new environmental program. But on the whole, despite being one of the world's top contributors to global greenhouse gas emissions, Russia has taken a wait-and-see attitude to the growing crisis of climate change. The government hasn't even ratified the Paris Agreement despite signing up for it in April 2016. Likewise, Moscow's reluctance to grapple with climate change doesn't mean the country is exempt from its consequences. The specified benefits come at a moderate temperature increase, while a significant rise in heat will yield in disaster. According to Russia's environmental ministry, an increase of 4 degrees Celsius would result in hotbeds of diseases due to contaminated drinking water and insects across the country. Southern Russia is at risk of flooding, which could deform railways and lead to more accidents. Meanwhile, the central portion of the country will see an overheating of buildings during heat waves, with the ministry warning that it could exhaust energy and water supplies in the urban centers. At the same time, the far eastern regions would be prone to mass flooding. On a more current note, the environmental ministry stated that deaths from environmental disasters in Russia have increased 11-fold between 2016 and 2017. For instance, in the summer of 2018, wildfires engulfed Siberia with their smoke reaching all the way across the Pacific. In the south of the country, deadly floods affected dozens of towns and villages, while in Siberia's Altai region, thousands of people were evacuated due to the sudden melting of snowcaps. Thus, while the Russian political and financial elite placed their bets on the Siberian farmlands and the Arctic shipping, the actual consequences of climate change are far from clear. Unforeseen and unintended episodes are bound to emerge over the years. Still, even if political leaders had an epiphany, for the Kremlin, the benefits outweigh the costs. I've been your host Shirvan from Caspian Report. Credit goes to our Patreon community for giving us the means and resources to make content like this. If you want to learn more, check out the link in the description. For now, thank you for your time and Sarol.